Welcome to this series of short webinars by the Legal Response International, LRI. For those who don't know LRI, we are an NGO that provides free legal support to developing countries as well as to other NGOs at the international climate change negotiations. We also assist developing countries in implementing the Paris Agreement in their national legislations and policies. This series of short webinars is designed to give an introduction to key elements of the Paris Agreement and is based on our recently published Guide to the Paris Agreement. A link to download this book for free will be available at the end of the webinar. Today's webinar provides an introduction to the transparency framework under the Paris Agreement. If you want to assess your knowledge and understanding of this topic, you can take a short online test at the end of the webinar. We are keen to hear back on how useful and informative you found the session and on how we can improve future ones. Please also get in touch if there are other topics you would like us to cover or cover in more depth. Our email address is enquiries@legalresponse.org, and this is also written on the last slide of the presentation. Our speaker today is a solicitor and the coordinator of LRI's Legal Advisory Service, Pascal Bird. Pascal has been involved in the climate change negotiations as a member of LRI since 2011 and regularly provides legal support to developing country delegations and to national law and policy makers. Pascal, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Olivia. I'm going to try and share my screen. Here we are, I think. Hello and welcome to anyone joining us today. I will be in this tutorial talking about what's known as transparency or the enhanced transparency framework under the Paris Agreement. So transparency is effectively the term that is used in the Paris Agreement to refer to the reporting and review process. Looking first at the Paris Agreement as a whole, as you may know, under Article 4 to 12 of the Paris Agreement, parties, the substantive commitments taken on by parties are set out on mitigation, adaptation, finance, etc. Article 13 to 15 then deal with reporting, review and compliance. They are therefore one of the few top-down elements in a regime that is essentially bottom-up. It's bottom-up insofar as it is countries that determine the ambition of their climate action. It's therefore a key element of the Paris Agreement. In the Paris Agreement, there are no mandatory targets set globally, so at international level. As I said earlier, it's up to each country to effectively decide for themselves what they are prepared to commit to in terms of a climate action and effort. In this context, having a robust regime that provides scrutiny and accountability of parties' action is key to build trust that all the parties are effectively contributing their share of the global effort and promoting effective implementation. It can also help assess the effectiveness of climate action and therefore assists with future planning and policy making. It may also help mobilize domestic support for stronger action and increasing ambition. The Paris regime relies on different mechanisms to promote implementation and ambition. Transparency framework is one, but there's also periodic global stocktake under Article 14 and a facilitative and implementation and compliance mechanism under Article 15. My focus today, though, will be on transparency, the enhanced transparency framework, which is established under Article 13. Article 13 establishes an enhanced transparency framework for action and support with built-in flexibility, and I will come back to that, that builds on collective experience. Article 13 has 14 paragraphs. It's one of the longest articles of the Paris Agreements, which give some clue as to its relative importance is the overall architecture and structure of the Paris Agreement. In addition to Article 13, in Katowice at COP24, the parties adopted modalities, detailed modalities, procedures, and guidelines known as MPGs to give additional guidance to parties for their reporting. As we will see, these are common modalities common to all countries, developed and developing, but with flexibility for developed countries. As I've mentioned, this is one framework for all countries. So in this respect, the new regime differs from the system established under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Kyoto Protocol, and the Cancun Agreements, which had different systems for developed countries on the one hand and developing system. Here we have one framework, but as I've mentioned already, there is built-in flexibility for developing countries that need it. The new framework builds on existing MRV system. It doesn't, it's not a new system built up from scratch. So it will build on the existing system of national communication, biennial reports, biennial update reports, etc. Paragraph 5 and paragraph 6 of Article 13 explain what the purpose of this reporting is. So it is to provide clarity on mitigation and adaptation actions and clarity on support provided, needed, and received. The intention is also to help inform the global stocktake. So the information that individual countries provide and that's generated under the enhanced transparency framework will be used to take stock and assess the collective progress of parties with the aim of reaching the goals of the Paris Agreement. I've mentioned already flexibility. Why flexibility and how is it operationalized in the agreement? So the Paris Agreement acknowledges that countries have different starting points, that they have different capacities, and that the new, more onerous requirements of the new framework will be challenging for many developing countries in particular. So flexibility is built into the system. The COP decision that accompanies the Paris Agreement gives some limited guidance as to how this flexibility is going to be operationalized. So it will apply to the scope of the reporting, to the frequency and to the level of detail of the reporting. There is, however, a recognition that the flexibility has to be balanced against other important objectives, such as making sure that the reporting improves over time and facilitating comparability and consistency and accuracy of reporting. So where there is flexibility, it comes with strings attached. So for example, countries that avail themselves of this flexibility will have to indicate the provision to which the flexibility will be applied. They will need to indicate what their capacity constraints are. They will still need to meet the frequency and the quality of reporting as it exists under the current regime. So they will still need to meet some minimum standards. Paragraphs 7 to 10 of Article 13 spell out what those reporting requirements are going to be. You can see here that there are differences depending on whether we're talking about mitigation, adaptation, and as we will see as well, support. In terms of mitigation, all parties will have to provide greenhouse gas inventories and information to track progress on implementing and achieving their contribution. So this is a mandatory requirement. By contrast, the requirement for adaptation is that all parties should, as appropriate, so they are encouraged to provide information, but this is not a mandatory requirement. The MPGs provide additional information on each reporting element. So national inventory reports should contain information on things like assumption and methodologies, gases covered, sectors, etc. The information to track progress should include a description of a country's NDC, indicators, methodologies used for targets, policies and actions on mitigation, etc. On adaptation, countries will need to submit information not only on observed and potential impacts, but also on challenges, progress, priorities, strategies and action. And they may also report on loss and damage associated with climate change impacts. In terms of support, and what do we mean by support? We mean here not only financial support, but also technology development and transfer and capacity building. You may notice here that the requirements are differentiated for developed and developing countries. Developed countries will have to provide information on the support provided. So it's a mandatory requirement, whereas developed countries are encouraged to provide this information on the support that they received or that's needed, but it's not compulsory. The MPGs, so the modalities and guidelines, again give guidance on the type of information that will need to be reported. This will include things such as the type of financial instruments, the funding source, the type of support, whether it's for mitigation or adaptation, a description of assumptions and methodology use, etc. To some extent, developing countries already report through their national communication and their biennial update reports on the support that they receive. However, under the new framework, they will need to use common reporting format, and the level of detail of the information they will have to supply will be higher. In terms of the frequency of the reporting, there's no change for developing countries. They will still be reporting every 2 years, except for least developed countries and small island states who can report at their discretion. So the first of these biennial transparency reports will need to be submitted at the latest by the end of 2024. The national inventory reports can be, as we can see here, either reported as a standalone document or as part of the biennial transparency reports. In terms of the frequency here, the developed countries will need to report or submit those reports every year, whereas developing countries will report every 2 years. There's no change for national communication. They remain in place and need to be submitted every 4 years. However, to avoid duplication of efforts, parties who choose to do so can submit those as a single document with their biennial transparency reports. I've talked about reporting. The second component of the ETF, the Enhanced Transparency Framework, is the review. This consists of 2 parts, a technical expert review, and it's followed then by a facilitative multilateral consideration of progress. Those are also key to provide additional scrutiny that all the countries are providing the fair share of the global effort, and hopefully will help improve the reporting over time. The technical expert review relates to the mandatory element of the biannual transparency reports. So countries will report on inventories and the information on tracking progress with implementing and achieving the mitigation part of their NDCs, and for developed countries, the information on the support provided. The facilitative multilateral consideration of progress will also consider implementation and achievement of countries' NDCs and support provided. You can see here basically the process and the timeline for the technical expert review, which can be a centralized review, in-country, a desk, or a simplified review. Basically, the technical expert review team will start off by asking preliminary questions to the country. Countries will then be given time to gather information and submit it to the team. The team will then review this information, may ask additional questions, and then will eventually issue some recommendation and a report which will eventually be published on the UNFCCC website. The decision 18 indicates that this process should be facilitative. So the aim here quite clearly is to help countries with improving their reporting over time. It's not intended to be punitive, nor is it intended to be intrusive. So for example, the technical expert review team cannot consider the adequacy of a country's NDC. The facilitative multilateral consideration of progress will also be based on the mandatory elements of the biannual transparency reports, the expert review report, and then any additional information that a party may wish to provide. Its format will be based on the existing regime under the International Assessment and Review and the International Consultation and Analysis. It will consist of two phases, a written question and answer phase, and then will be followed with a working group session, which will take place during the meetings of the subsidiary body for implementation. All the records of those question and answers and the working groups will then be put together and then published on the UNFCCC website. The Paris Agreement acknowledges that developing countries will need support to build, to meet the more onerous requirements under the enhanced transparency framework. And to that end, in Paris, it established a capacity building initiative for transparency with the aim of strengthening the institutional and the technical capacity of developing countries in meeting those requirements. There are, so basically with the adoption of the modalities, procedures and guidelines, the bulk of the reporting rules is now in place. However, there are still some elements that need to be negotiated and developed and adopted at CMA3, hopefully at COP20C by the parties. They concern things such as the templates for the biannual transparency report and the national inventory reports, common reporting tables and common tabular formats. And in this respect, one of the challenges will be to accommodate the diversity of countries' NDCs with the common reporting formats, and also to ensure that the information in these common reporting tables and common tabular formats is complete and comparable, whilst also at the same time giving flexibility to developing countries that need it. It's quite clear that for developing countries, they will need to ramp up their efforts in order to meet the more stringent requirements of this new framework. Depending on the national circumstances, this may mean a number of things. So, for example, countries may need to put in place new or improved data system on collecting and recording emissions, adaptation actions, support needed, etc. They may need to train staff so that the staff has the requisite knowledge to comply with the requirement in terms of, for example, applying methodologies and accounting approaches and participating in the technical expert review process. Coordination and cooperation amongst the various ministries and agencies involved will be key in this process as well. And another aspect possibly to mention is that grassroots communities will need to be involved as well. So some training and education of those communities will need to happen too. I have come to the end of my presentation. I hope you found it informative and enjoyable. If you've got any questions, get in touch at enquiries@legalresponse.org. If you want some more information on the transparency framework, we will find this in this guide to the Paris Agreement. And also stay tuned for our future tutorial. Many thanks and goodbye.
Many thanks for your presentation, Pascal. And just a reminder to our audience that you can assess your knowledge and understanding of today's topic by taking the test that is provided on our website.